What I try to help people understand through some of the cultural and farmer organizing work that I do and in my own family's experience is that a well-structured land trust is actually a tool of sovereignty. You're not surrendering your land to an institution necessarily, but you're really making your values legally enforceable. You're saying this land stays in agriculture, this land stays in this family, and this land is not for sale.
Hello, everyone. My name is Felicia Bell. I am regional coordinator and ag specialist in the Gulf States region of the National Center for Appropriate Technology. And today we're going to talk about land trusts and succession planning and just trying to save land within farm families. So we have two guests today, Lindsey Richards, and I'll let each guest introduce themselves and what organization they are from. And also our second guest is Alsie Parks. And again, we're speaking about land longevity. What can we do to share opportunities, share ideas with our clients at NCAT and at large to think about what we need to do to make sure land stays within our family or land gets shared to larger entities when that time comes. So first and foremost, we're going to have questions being shared or asked, and each guest will give their own perspective. So we will begin with the first question, and it is, can you share a story of a farm or family whose future changed because of a land trust? So what was at risk? What happened after the land was protected? And either one of you all can begin.
All right. Well, I can jump in. Thank you so much for having us, Ms. Felicia. Again, I'm Alsie Parks. I serve as the co-executive director for SAAFON, the Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network. We're a grassroots network of farmers committed to sustainable agriculture across the Southeast and in the Caribbean, and I'm really grateful to be here. And yeah, I'm excited to answer this question. So when you asked us to kind of like prepare and share a story of a farm or a family, I wanted to share some of my own story. The story I carry most is my own family's. My ancestors were educators, tenant farmers, and Black landowners in the Piedmont region of Georgia, deep in the Black Belt South. And that land where I'm now reviving Motherline Farm alongside my aging matriarchs has been in my family's hands across generations, really since the 1870s. And I can tell you it feels like a privilege to be a part of that story and that my family's land journey is a part of my cultural inheritance. This question made me think about Black land loss as a much more common public narrative, and that strategies that Black families have utilized to protect and preserve their land and what has been a precious asset for their families and the land that they belong deeply to is just not as prevalent and accessible. So I was grateful to have this conversation just to make more expansive narratives available to folks. And that loss is not by choice, but, I really see it as being intentional, whether it be through heirs property vulnerabilities, tax sales, partition actions, and just like outright theft dressed up in legal language. So those new narratives for me can really provide hope and trust, and a conversation today that I hope our conversation today can really add to that hope. And I hear this story constantly, that land that fed a family for generations being gone in a single probate dispute. And what land protection changes is the ending of that story. It makes families' intentions legally binding. And so for the land that can really outlast one generation's vulnerability. So yeah, for my family, our intention is, instead of individuals directly owning the property, that a land trust owns it, a family trust owns it, and family members can benefit from it, according to the rules that we set together. And, you know, I think the last question that you asked was what happened after land was protected. And what I can say for my own family is my matriarch, affectionately known as Doc, who turns 87 this week, can breathe easier and rest because she can, I think, truly internalize for the first time that the intentions for her descendants on our family's land are more secure. And before I hand it over to Lindsey, only because I really appreciate the questions and the framing that were offered. An important learning for me in this process was that a family land trust is not necessarily a specific standardized legal entity. I went to a lawyer and was like, I want a family land trust. And I learned that it's usually structured as a revocable or irrevocable trust under state laws. A family, land trust is a legal tool to hold and manage family property so it stays organized and can pass smoothly across generations. And yeah, I really hope Lindsey will be able to share a bit more about their experience with more kind of like organizational land trusts. But thanks for the question and the invitation. I'll pass to you, Lindsey.
All right. Thanks, Alsie. I really appreciate your perspective and you sharing your knowledge and experience. I think it's really helpful to get a different perspective from the way I kind of took this question. But first off, my name is Lindsey Richards. I work for American Farmland Trust for the Texas Regional Program as the Texas Gulf Coast Education and Outreach Specialist. So I'm currently working with farmers on their succession plans and also taking some farmers who are interested in accessing land. I do personally work with a lot of land trusts. AFT is not your typical land trust. Since we are a national nonprofit, we usually refer to regional land trusts. So we have so many land trusts in Texas. But in case you haven't heard of AFT, we are a national nonprofit whose mission is to save America's farms and ranches by protecting agriculture land, promoting sound farming practices, and helping families stay on the land. And we take a holistic approach and recognize the vital connection between the land itself, the practices employed on that land, and the farmers and ranchers who steward that land. And yeah, so I took when I read this question about land trust and what happens when it's protected, I automatically thought of conservation easements, which is the legal tool most land trusts use the most in their work because it's a great option for landowners who want to keep their land in agriculture while simultaneously honoring the past while supporting the future. They're legal agreements that remove most of the development rights from a property in perpetuity. And there's some public state and federal programs that will pay farmers and ranchers to protect their land with an easement, which preserves the land while also helping them be more economically viable. And I'll just tell you a story about, I recently met a Texas farmer whose father had recently passed away, and they started the farm and ranch together. They worked really hard to improve the soil health through cover cropping and all kinds of other conservation practices over the past 40 years. He has a couple of siblings that live off the farm, but they're not interested in agriculture. And his mother, who is still alive, she sold half the property to him. And he is currently working with USDA and NRCS on an agriculture conservation easement program, which will protect his portion of the family land from development. And that easement will help him stay on the land and retire and help him continued working on it by pulling out some of the equity in the land, so they will be comfortable retiring. And so I think that's how, like you said, I'll see about like the ease of mind, conservations can provide that.
Thank you for both of your answers. I really appreciate that. And the next question is that the misconception. So many landowners hear the term land trust, and Alsie, I think you spoke to this. They aren't sure though what it really means for their control over their land. So what is the biggest misconception landowners have about land trusts? And Ashley, let's start with you since you touched on it briefly with your own family trust.
Sure. So I resonated with this question because I too believe that one of the biggest misconceptions is, it means giving land trust means giving up control. And I want to name why that fear, I think, runs especially deep as a Black Southerner, for Black Southerners. And we didn't arrive at distrust of legal institutions by accident. Our land has been taken through legal mechanisms our whole history in this country. And so when a Black farmer in Georgia or Mississippi here signs something that affects your land, I think the instinct is to protect yourself. And I think that instinct is earned and wise. What I try to help people understand through some of the cultural and farmer organizing work that I do and in my own family's experience is that a well-structured land trust is actually a tool of sovereignty. You're not surrendering your land to an institution necessarily. And, speaking from the perspective of something that is, I think, a different tool than Lindsey is sharing. But you're really making your values legally enforceable. You're saying this land stays in agriculture, this land stays in this family, and this land is not for sale. And you're putting the force of the law behind what your grandparents could only pass down by word of mouth and prayer. And that's a different relationship to legal protection than I think Black people have historically been offered. And so, with this question, I would like to offer a reframing as people are exploring a trust for your family, that revocable or irrevocable trust can help families avoid probate after someone dies, and for shares of land to keep getting split more and more and more to the scale of heirs that are unmanageable in terms of the numbers. So it can really help people get on one accord and provide protection from disputes amongst heirs, or family, but, every family has humans in it. I think there can be more assurance for keeping land in family for generations with less likelihood for selling. It could, what I've been learning is it can actually offer more privacy. Trust ownership can sometimes reduce public visibility of the owners of the land and can just provide clear rules for shared property like family farms, vacation homes, inherited land. So I guess I wanted to share some of my learning so that trust, so we can build more trust in the trust.
Well, I really appreciate that you're taking the family trust perspective, because again, I have more of a entity, a land nonprofit lens to this question. And I actually reached out to a friend of mine who I work closely with. His name's Stephen Ramirez, and he's the conservation director at the Texas Land Conservancy, to help me answer some of these questions, or this question really. And he said there are a couple concepts that are repeated frequently as far as misconceptions, and it's usually around the idea of that a land trust will tell a farmer what to do with their land, or that it's like the government is taking your land. And I guess some people confuse land trusts for being a state or government entity, but a lot of times they are private, nonprofit agencies that protect land from development. Land trusts generally aren't anti-development, but they work in partnership with private landowners to protect agricultural and ecological landscapes that are important to all of us, because protected lands provides important public benefits. It keeps lands available for food production, preserves wildlife habitat, controls flooding risks by soaking up excessive rains, supports rural economies, offers scenic beauty, and so much more. So Stephen also emphasized that working with land trust is always voluntary. It's always up to the landowner whether they want to commit to a conservation easement. No one is ever going to take their development rights away from them. When a landowner gives up these rights voluntarily, it's called a donated conservation easement, and in return they can receive tax benefits for this donation, since the rights are often very valuable, depending on like where you are and how the threat of development is, how much pressure there is in the area. And in Texas, there's a lot. A land trust isn't going to tell you what to do with your land. It's typically designed to support what you have already been doing while protecting the future natural resources. And I just wanted to mention that the Texas Land Conservancy has a couple frequently asked questions about misconceptions on their Protect Your Land page. It's at the bottom, and I highly recommend looking at that if you're curious or concerned about conservation easements for your land.
Thank you so much. I love those answers. Now, and I like how we're basically answering the next question in some of our answers. And so we're going to move to our next question, which is decision making. So for a landowner thinking about succession planning, what signals tell you that a land trust might be the right option, and when it might not be the best choice? So what signals would a landowner come up with or feel per se, or if even a neighbor may share something with them as a signal to say a land trust is good or bad for you in particular?
I can hop in first because I'm kind of speaking from a particular kind of like cultural base. Our signals are more feelings. I think the signal that a land trust is the right move is when a family can answer the question, what is this land for? Not what it's worth on the market, but what it is for. And when that answer is clear and shared across family, protective structures can hold. I've seen at my own family's land, and I've seen in SAAFON member families who have held land for 4 or 5 generations in the rural South. But I've also seen where it breaks down, and I want to be honest about that because it matters. And so when land is a family's only financial asset and they're genuinely struggling to keep the lights on, a conservation easement or a land trust might not be the right first tool. And I think we can't ask Black farming families to protect land they can't afford to steward. There are a lot of grassroots efforts by Black farming institutions that are in ecosystems with each other to build programming and offerings that kind of support land protection and the economic support necessary to keep that together. The operating capital, the infrastructure investment, emergency resources, protection without those things means many farming families are still carrying too much burden. And for me, the legal structure is only as strong as the life wrapped around it. And yeah, just imagining a grandmother who owns 50 acres of farmland, if she leaves it directly to her 3 children and disagreements could arise and someone might, want to sell their share. Instead, she creates a family land trust that allows all descendants to use the land, prevents selling it outside of the family, and appoints trustees to manage the taxes and maintenance. And this is a part of my own family's journey. So, want to be realistic, especially because I'm offering a different perspective.
I think Alsie, totally agree that just having the legal structure can offset a lot of future financial burden, having to go through the disputes, just kind of having that structure to tell people how they have to work together, and kind of lays out who's in charge of what their roles are is really important. A more simple approach to this, but when people have a specific goal, as Alsie mentioned, to protect their legacy for what they've done on the land, is usually a good indicator that a land trust would be a good fit to help with that structure. people who own the land, if they want to give ultimate flexibility and freedom to their successors, is usually when you see people that are not interested in a conservation easement or working with the land trust. So depends. Like, are you working with someone who doesn't mind telling their heirs, hey, this is what it is, take it or leave it, like you can participate or you can get out? Or do they want to make it so they can do whatever they want with it in the future, which can, leave the land up to risk for sale? But and also I'm talking more for like in a structure, not a family trust, that I'm talking more in a land, like a institutional land trust situation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And definitely both perspectives. So again, you kind of touched on it, moving into generational legacy. Across the U.S., many families want their land to stay in agriculture for generations. What cultural values or family practices have you seen that successfully keep land in the same lineage?
The families I've seen hold land across generations are the ones who made land a part of their identity, not just their inheritance. And I think there's a sentiment I grew up with and I hear echoed across our farmer base that is like, this is where my people are from. Not just where we live, but where we are from, our home, our belonging. And I think that distinction is everything. It holds a relationship to place that no market offer or money can fully dissolve. And on my family's land, what I'm working to revive isn't just a farm operation, it's a practice. The foodways of my grandmother's held, the land-based traditions, the rituals of growing and tending and feeding people. We call these practices in SAAFON's framework Black agrarianism. It's our cultural lifeways. And what I know from this work is that when young people have an embodied relationship with land, and when they've worked with their hands, they've eaten from it, they've been held by it, they fight to keep it. The legal documents matter, but it's the culture that makes people want to protect something in the first place. Culture is the infrastructure underneath all the rest.
Thank you, Alsie.
But yeah, I was just going to share that I was recently in California for a training, and we visited this beautiful, diverse organic farm called Full Valley Farm. And they're working on passing the land down to their son and his wife. And I think the reason that their transition has been successful so far is because the son and daughter-in-law are allowed to choose how they want to contribute to the farm. In their case, it was to add a food kitchen so they can create value-added products and host farm-to-table events. And so the successors are able to create an opportunity for themselves, be independent, but still involved. And then I think the biggest and most obvious reason for families to stay connected to the land through living on the land or working on it. I think when people lose connection to the land is when we see the biggest threat to not wanting to continue the legacy. And then also I would say if you're trying to keep the land in the family, but the next generation isn't interested, I would suggest being open to different ideas to stay in farming and keeping the land in the family until there is a generation that might be interested. And if that's the case, leasing some land could be a good option for both the retiring farmer not wanting to sell, or for a capital strapped beginner farmer who needs opportunity to learn from a mentor and build equity.
Thank you so much. That's very, very good perspective.
This episode of ATTRA's Voices from the Field is sponsored in part by Farm Credit, AgWest Farm Credit, American Ag Credit, CoBank, Calusa Glen Farm Credit, Fresno Madera Farm Credit, Golden State Farm Credit, and Yosemite Farm Credit are cooperatively owned lending institutions providing agriculture and rural America with a dependable source of credit. These institutions specialize in financing farmers, ranchers, farm-owned cooperatives, rural utilities, and agribusinesses. Farm Credit offers a broad range of loan products and financial services, including long-term real estate loans, operating lines of credit, equipment and facility loans, cash management, and appraisal and leasing services. Everything a growing business needs. Visit their website at www.farmcreditalliance.com for more information or to connect with a representative.
Now moving on to like the future of land ownership. We're going to go out 20, 30 years out. What do you think will be that biggest threat, the tallest hurdle for keeping agricultural land in the hands of farmers? And then what solutions are emerging that could give those families hope?
I think the biggest threat is the speculative capital. There's institutional investors, developers, and land marketers that are simply pricing out Black farmers and small farmers out of ownership entirely, and doing it fast. And, I emphasize doing it fast because this isn't like theoretical for me in terms of like in 20 or in 30 years, like it's happening now. And I think now is demonstrating that it's even more important that small scale family farms exist. I think too, one of the threats is like there's a lot of modern socialization being kind of like manufactured through digital media trends. And I think that's really outpaced cultural transmissions of values in families and communities. And that, being able to have a nuanced understanding of the value of land and family and what can be built from it is, I think, becoming diluted, honestly. And I would say across the southern region, especially stewarding networks of farming and land stewarding families, I can see lived crises every season. Whether it's the operating costs that outpace any market return, heirs property disputes unresolved for 2 or 3 generations, making just land legally more vulnerable. And developers making offers to families who are land rich and, frankly, cash poor with no other options. And so the South is ground zero for this, and Black families built wealth in this land and have been systemically separated from it. And right now, I think there's a new wave of extraction just dressed up in investment language. And what gives me hope is the ecosystem of community-led solutions being built in direct response to that. Organizing efforts and community-led funds have emerged in our region that are designed to move resources at the speed of actual need and not the speed of institutional philanthropy. The knowledge exists in our communities, the love for the land exists, and what we're building now is the infrastructure to match resources to that love before the window closes.
Beautifully said, Alsie. And I'm just going to kind of give a Texas perspective. I think there are a lot of pressure points that threaten our agriculture land, access to water, rising cost of land, development pressure, as Alsie was mentioning, generational shifts in interest, climate change. You could also have a beginner farmer interested, but as Alsie mentioned, since they're the first generation, they may not have the capital to hold on to the farming business. It's until it turns a profit. It's really expensive. I tried to farm land and if you don't own the land, if you don't have built-in capital, it's really hard to make it and last until you turn a profit. But more than just the land prices, the whole economics are just really challenging to get into farming and be successful. There needs to be public investment to pay for what things cost and are worth, especially if someone's farming organically or regeneratively. In Texas, we need a program that connects land seekers with exiting farmers whose values align. And nationally, in the next like 15, 20 years, we're going to see a tidal wave of farmland transition to new ownership as the current owners retire or die. And land trusts and conservation easements can, in my opinion, help meet this moment. But we also need to explore other options, as Alsie's mentioned. So whether a farmer ranch family wants to use an easement or not, they should engage in succession planning. And in agriculture, succession planning is a formal process to holistically plan for the future of a farmer ranch. It engages a range or economic, emotional, and legal elements to identify the next steps for an operation once the current owners, operators step away through retirement or death. And, some ranchers and farmers say they want to die in their boots on the farm, and that sentiment is admirable. But when that happens without any written plans in place for the future, the fate of the farm is in question. And only about 23 to 40% of our retiring Texas farmers have a written succession plan. And without a proper succession plan, we'll see more farmland lost to real estate development, data centers and all kinds of stuff. But our land is most vulnerable at these moments of generational transition. And with development pressure so intense in much of the country, AFT has a research project called Farms Under Threat, and they projected that we'll convert about 20 million acres of farmland between 2016 and 2040, and 2.2 million of those acres are in Texas. So yeah, this farmland loss is a real threat, and we will also see more farmland subsum to ever-growing large-scale farm operations that are dominating land ownership and the farm economy. For the future of small and mid-sized family farms, we have to start taking succession planning more seriously. And agriculture succession planning is difficult. Farming and ranching are livelihoods, and they are also lifestyles. Agriculture is a major part of many families and ranchers' identities, and to plan for a time when you're no longer the owner or primary producer on a farm or ranch is emotionally tough for many families and many farmers and ranchers, and it's also expensive. It's very difficult financially. I think one of the farmers I worked with said it's costing him between 60 and 70K to have all the legal tools and documents to have this plan in place. And because many farmers and ranchers have used their income to pay for the land they farm, they don't have many liquid assets. And as Alsie was saying, most of the wealth is tied up in the land and equipment and livestock, meaning like to have enough money for retirement or end of life health care, they must sell those assets. So it's why some people, like Alsie actually said it, like land rich and cash poor. And it's that's why many farmers must sell their land, even if they don't want to. So that's why we say with the proper planning and the use of certain tools, families can plan ahead to make sure their land is cared for, their finances are secured. AFT has a program called Land Transfer Navigators, and it's a partnership with U.S. State NRCS and 36 organizations across the country to provide farm transfer coaches that help walk farm and ranch families through this process, kind of be a support system, a neutral party, and the goal is to retain agricultural land while helping the aging generation step away with confidence and dignity, and supporting the next generation in accessing land affordability.
Thank you so much. And that is the reason why I really, truly wanted to do this, is because both of you have stated that it's not 20, 30 years out. We're living in this now, and succession planning and however you want to call planning, just planning for the future our farmers need to do it now, and they need to be gathering documents, and they need to be talking with their family on their goals. What do they want to see happen with the land? Like, all of that needs to start now versus later. And both of you all have said that in your perfect way. With that being said, if a farmer or landowner listening today wants to protect their land but doesn't know where to start, what is the very first step they should take?
I think in alignment with what I've kind of been sharing, start with a talk on the porch. Like, seriously, before calling a lawyer, before looking up a land trust organization, get your people together and ask, what do we want this land to be for? I think that conversation will tell you whether your family is aligned, where the tensions are, and what kind of protection actually fits your situation. Black Southern families, especially, that conversation often surfaces things that have never been said out loud, and who's been carrying the land, who's been absent, and what different people need. Have that conversation anyway, and have it with love. That's what it took in my family, transparently. And at SAAFON, we say that farmer organizing starts with relationship, and land protection is no different. Once you have that clarity, then you find your partners who understand your history and values, not just your acreage. Seek out organizations that have been in real relationship with farming communities, especially Black farming communities in the South, and because your land story deserves advocates who already know the terrain. And yeah, I'm grateful for this conversation. I've learned a lot about American Land Trust and Farmland Trust, and Lindsey's perspective is also really like opened my perspective around like other things that are possible. So yeah, just really appreciating this conversation and how round and expansive our perspectives are.
Thanks, Alsie. I feel the same way about you. I feel like my interpretation now needs to, be a little more open when I say land trust. It's not, there's different interpretations of it. And I think you actually living through it with a family experience is a huge advantage for you, because like it's just helping you go through your work with so much experience, and also understanding and how difficult these situations can be, how nuanced these situations can be. So I appreciate you. And I would say, I think usually like the first step they could take, like Elsie said, is just be prepared to have that heartfelt conversation. Bring everyone together who will be affected by a transition, your kids, any other heirs. And if you don't have heirs, perhaps a next generation young farmer you're working with, or any trusted employees. Make sure that you're using trusted, effective resources. AFT has a free online farm transfer toolkit, and that's a great place to start. Also, Land for Good has a really good land transfer workbook to kind of help you evaluate what your goals and values are, and kind of understand what the position you're in, and I think having things written down and getting everybody on the same page so there's no confusion. Sometimes in family dynamics, there's a lot of things that can go unsaid. And so if you need to bring in somebody like me, I'm happy to help in these conversations, sit at the table or on Zoom. It doesn't have to be in person. But yeah, we really make sure that we make that everyone's voices are being heard. And actually hearing it from somebody else may help another family member understand it a little better, because we just have these internal biases all the time, and like sometimes we can't help it. So I think having somebody outside the family can help. Just make sure they're a trusted person. And if you are interested in protecting your land from development through a conservation easement, the Texas Land Trust Council has a really good regional map of where all the land trusts are located. And I would suggest starting there and exploring the different options. and find a land trust that feels like an appropriate fit based on your location and property needs. And because the land trusts maybe have different needs too. Some can work with community gardens. Others, they work on a more large scale. They work with more natural resources and parks. Some work with agricultural lands. It all depends on what you have. Yeah. Maybe it's working with an estate planning attorney in the future after you've kind of come to an agreement with your family on the next step. Kind of maybe trying to identify some professionals that can help you and your family. So like tax advisor, financial advisor, somebody who can help achieve your financial goals, or maybe it's all of these people. But yeah, that's kind of where I would go. But
Thank you. Thank you both so much. I really, really have appreciated your time, your perspectives, your energy that you have put on these questions for us, thinking about them, how it will work within the world we live in now, because it is very, very different for different people that live in our country. So I wanted to make sure that this conversation was had. I wanted these perspectives to be put out so all of our constituents from both of your organizations, also including NCAT, could hear these type of conversations and what needs to be had with their families, because it's very, very important and it cannot be solved in one conversation. So I thank you both so much. Again, I would love for our clientele, the National Center for Appropriate Technology clients, to reach out to both ladies here, Lindsey Richards from American Farmland Trust, and all of the information that they have on their website and programs that they have created for this topic that we're speaking about today, as well as Alsie Parks that represent SAAFON, and they work in the Gulf states, Southeast U.S. And please reach out to them to be able to get information for your family, the situation that you are going through. That's why they're here. They work for beautiful organizations that are here and been here for a very long time to assist you in what you need on this particular topic. That's why they're here. So thank you, ladies, so much. I appreciate your perspective. I appreciate your time today. And just always know that NCAT is here for you both within your organizations and what you're doing out in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia, and thank you, Lindsey. Appreciate you both.
Thanks, Felicia. Thanks, Alsie. This was amazing. I'm happy to be here and participate in this.
Likewise.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at atra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. ATRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.